I've been working on this pork cutlet sandwich recipe for a while, and I think you're gonna love it. It all starts with some pork chops. These are the most traditional cut of pork to use for pork cutlet sandwiches, about a ½ inch in thickness with a ribbon of fat along the edge. I take a fork and I stab into it across both sides of the pork in order to tenderize it. You want the pork nice and tender so that it contrasts nicely with the bread and the outside crust. If you have a meat tenderizer, you can use that instead, but this method works great. Now I like to wet brine my pork as I find it gives me the best balance of juiciness and tenderness. You can use whichever brine method you like, or for even more flavor, you can marinate it with your preferred marinade. Into the fridge it goes for an overnight brine, and when it's ready I drain it and dry it off, then cut into that layer of fat. This will prevent the pork from curling as it cooks. I also give it a few slashes across the surface to make sure it stays flat. Now if you remember my video on layered pork katsu, I made my own panko breadcrumbs, and I'll be doing the same thing with this pork cutlet sandwich. Cubed white bread goes into a food processor, and then it's pulsed until we get a chunkier than usual panko. It definitely gives a much better craggy crust than store-bought panko. So here's our battering station for our tonkatsu with flour on the left, a beaten egg in the middle, and our homemade panko on the right, along with some extra for sprinkling on top. Working from left to right, we go with a flour and egg dredge, and this time I'm doing a second dredging of flour and egg, then into the panko. I find this second dredge gives us a thicker crust that will stay crunchier when we pour our delicious homemade tonkatsu sauce on top. More on that later. I let my tonkatsu rest a bit so the crust can adhere to the surface of the pork. And while it's resting, I thinly slice some cabbage and soak it in water. Next, I remove the crusts of my bread. This is more of an aesthetic thing, so feel free to leave yours on. And also, you can use those crusts to make more panko too. Now over at the stove, I pour oil into my cast iron. You see that metal thing clipped to the side of the pot? That's my probe thermometer. It allows me to see how hot my oil is so I can get a perfect fry every time. No more having to guess how hot my oil is, I can just glance down and see it. If you're not frying with a high quality kitchen thermometer, I highly recommend that you invest in one. I've got links down below to this exact one I'm using. Once our oil is at the right temperature, the katsu go in for a hot bubbly fry. One thing to be aware of is that the pork will tend to sit at the bottom of the pot in the first half of the fry, meaning that you can potentially burn one side of it. What I do in that case is gently move it around to keep it from sitting at the bottom of the pot, and when the crust is hardened enough to be handled, I flip it over. When it's done, take it out of the oil and allow it to rest for a few minutes. For the sandwich, I'm using two kinds of condiments, Japanese mayo and my homemade tonkatsu sauce. It's absolutely delicious and so much better than the bottled stuff that you'll find at the Asian grocery store. I'll leave a link to it at the end of this video, so make sure to check that out after you watch the rest of this one. To my bread, I'm spreading the mayo and adding a bit of my tonkatsu sauce on top. Next, I'm dousing both sides of my katsu with sauce. Why? Because I find that you need way more sauce than you think on these sandwiches. Yeah, it's a little bit messier, but it's extremely delicious this way. With the katsu ready, you want to spread the sauce on the other slice of bread, top it with some sliced cabbage, give it a nice press, then slice off that hanging piece of pork and take a bite. You deserve it. Cut the sandwich into thirds and get ready to enjoy the best dang pork cutlet sandwich recipe you've ever had.
Hi, どうぞ。
いただきます。Ooh. Nailed it. The meat inside, really soft. The outside panko, you made panko from the scratch, right?
Yeah.
Wow, that's why it has a crunchy texture. The bread is really soft, meat is really soft, but the outside batter is so crunchy. And you got to have this tonkatsu sauce. This tonkatsu sauce brings it to the next level. Ah, the sauce.
For the full written recipe, make sure to head to my website, link in the description below, and make sure you click here to see how to make my homemade tonkatsu sauce.